Very well. The second presentation, the second theme, is Daniel Fu from Tudor High School in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Patrick Tan from Carmel High School in Carmel, Indiana.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Patrick Tan.
And my name is Daniel Fu.
And we are presenting our project, Chaos and Robustness in a Single Family of Genetic Oscillatory Networks. So at the core of many biological processes lie genetic regulatory networks, which are collections of genes, proteins, and other molecules that regulate gene expression and affect the development and function within cells. Now, a subset of these are called genetic oscillatory networks, which are significant because they oscillate in their gene expression. Now, two well-known examples of genetic oscillatory networks are the circadian rhythm and the cell cycle, both of which have been studied extensively by researchers in the past. Their studies have shown that abnormalities and problems within GONs can lead to disease. For example, sleep disorders are often caused by disruptions within the circadian rhythm, and cancer is the result of a malfunctioning cell cycle. Thus, a greater understanding of these oscillatory mechanisms could lead to better treatments for such diseases. Now, most genetic oscillatory networks involve many components and interactions, making them inherently complex, as shown by the following diagram. Thus, their mechanisms are difficult to understand. So to circumvent this problem, researchers often use reduced mathematical models to analyze genetic oscillatory networks. Now, the main method that researchers use are called differential equations, of which our study is primarily concerned with two major types: ordinary differential equations, or ODEs, and delay differential equations, or DDEs. Each type has its own pros and cons. ODEs account for each reaction within a network with its own equation, and they're relatively easy to analyze individually using mathematical techniques. The problem is that once you account for all the reactions, they can become quite complex. And they're hard to validate in vivo because there's no built-in delay. DDEs, on the other hand, do incorporate a discrete time delay, and they eliminate the need for numerous equations, also making them easier to calibrate. Judging from this alone, you can probably see that DDEs account for the two major shortcomings of ODEs. However, DDEs are understood far less, and they're equivalent to a system of infinitely many ODEs. In other words, they are significantly more complex mathematically. Thus, our objectives are as follows. We aim to analyze a family of GONs modeled with DDEs and develop new techniques to analyze DDEs, including a reduction of DDEs to low-dimensional systems of ODEs and an analytical estimate of the complexity of DDEs. Finally, we apply these techniques to the GONs themselves.
The family of models that we studied is shown here. Here, X represents the concentration of a protein. X tau represents a discrete time delay. F of X tau represents the synthesis of the protein, and G of X represents the degradation of the protein. In previous works, f of x tau has taken on two forms: monotonic, shown here, and non-monotonic, shown here. In both of these forms, there's a parameter n. This is the Hill cooperativity factor, which accounts for multimerization of transcription factors. The biggest difference between the monotonic and the non-monotonic synthesis terms is that the monotonic synthesis term results in purely negative feedback, whereas the non-monotonic synthesis term results in feedback that can switch between positive and negative. Similarly, G of X has also taken on two forms in previous works: saturable, shown here, and non-saturable, shown here. If we pair each of the possibilities for the synthesis terms with each of the possibilities for the degradation terms, we can produce the following family of equations. As you can see, the model with monotonic synthesis and saturable degradation is shown here. The model with non-monotonic synthesis and saturable degradation is shown here, and so on for the other two possibilities. Through various numerical simulations, we were able to determine the roles that the synthesis and the degradation terms played in determining the dynamics of their models. For the synthesis terms, we found that non-monotonic synthesis creates models that become chaotic at high n and tau, whereas monotonic synthesis creates models that are robust, which means that they are able to maintain regular periodic oscillations against changes in the parameters. For the degradation terms, we found that non-saturable degradation damped oscillations and narrowed the oscillatory region of N, whereas saturable degradation did not have the same effect. We were also able to determine the roles of the parameters N and tau. For both N and tau, we found that there were minimum values which had to be met for oscillations to occur. For the parameter N, we found that high N led to chaotic behavior in the models with non-monotonic synthesis. And for the parameter tau, we found that it controlled the period of oscillation in all 4 models. The next major step of our analysis was calculating bifurcation curves, which are curves in the parameter space across which qualitative changes in the dynamics of the models can occur. In particular, we were interested in the bifurcation curve corresponding to the birth of oscillations. We can calculate this bifurcation curve using a method called linear stability analysis. If we apply this method to our models, we can derive the following equation. Here we have graphed the bifurcation curve on the parameter space of N and tau. As you can see, there are no oscillations to the left of the curve, whereas there are oscillations to the right of the curve. Thus, this bifurcation curve accurately predicts the birth of oscillations.
So as expressed earlier, one of our main objectives was to reduce DDEs to low-dimensional systems of ODEs. Our reduction technique is based upon the fact that DDEs are equivalent to a system of infinitely many ODEs. This assertion can be justified by the fact that the trajectory of a point governed by a DDE is dependent upon the value of a point in the past, known as the delayed version of the original point. Now for our system, if we let a variable y equal the delayed version of x, we have the following system of one ODE and one DDE shown here. Now to convert this into a system of only ODEs, we then let a variable z replace the synthesis term f of y tau of the second equation to get the following 2 equations. Now the next thing that must be determined is the behavior of z. In order for the reduction to accurately reproduce the dynamics of the original system, z must emulate the behavior of the term it replaced. In this case, the synthesis term. Now given that we have 2 types of synthesis, monotonic and non-monotonic, it also follows that the behavior of z should be divided into 2 cases as well. So for the monotonic case, notice that as n approaches infinity, the monotonic synthesis term approaches a stepwise function. Thus, for this case, we simply have to let z take on 2 values and have it switch between them to serve as our reduction. Now for the non-monotonic case, as n approaches infinity, the term approaches a piecewise function. Consequently, we found that these types of systems were irreducible. Now to finish off the reduction for the monotonic case, we then calculate boundary curves to determine when to switch z. Implementing them, we have the following reduction shown here. The original delay system is graphed in red, while the reduction is graphed in green. As you can see, the red and green curves are nearly indistinguishable, which demonstrates that our technique is valid. Now you may ask, what about the systems with non-monotonic synthesis that could not be reduced? While our reduction technique is not applicable to these types of systems, our other technique for analytically estimating the dimension is applicable because it is applicable to systems whose dynamics become chaotic. Now this technique is derived from characteristic exponents, which are byproducts of the linear stability analysis that essentially dictate the model's behavior. In particular, if we let k be the number of conjugate pairs of characteristic exponents with positive real part, we have the following equation shown here. Now what we found was that the slope of k matched the change in dimension with respect to tau for the models with non-monotonic synthesis. As you can see from the diagram, the red dots represent the numerically calculated dimension, which we obtain using a software package known as Tesian, and the blue line is a representation of the slope of k. As you can see, the blue line and the red dots agree with each other quite well, which also illustrates that this technique is valid.
Because of the interdisciplinary nature of our project, our implications are wide-ranging. For example, biologically, we found that long chains of reactions, long nuclear transport, etc., which constitute the delay in our models, control the period of oscillation in natural genetic oscillators. Next, we found that highly periodic and robust natural genetic oscillators, such as their circadian clock, are likely to rely solely on negative feedback. Finally, we found that natural genetic oscillators that rely on both positive and negative feedback, such as heart rate, must maintain small delays in order to exhibit healthy oscillations. Mathematically, our successful reduction implies that the delay-based mechanism for oscillations is similar to the hysteresis-based mechanism for oscillations found in oscillators such as the relaxation oscillators. Our reduction method is the first general method for reducing DDEs to low-dimensional systems of ODEs, and similarly, our analytic dimension lines are the first analytic estimates of dimension and are not limited by numerical constraints. These new mathematical tools provide new frameworks through which researchers can analyze DDEs in the future. So in summary, in our project, we have analyzed a family of DDEs and characterized their dynamics with numerical simulations, used linear stability analysis to calculate their bifurcation curves, and developed two new techniques: a reduction of DDEs to low-dimensional systems of ODEs, and an analytical estimate of dimension. In the future, there are a few new research directions that we would like to explore. We would like to explore the fundamental mechanisms behind the synthesis and the degradation terms. We'd like to extend our work with the analytical dimension lines and perhaps calculate their y-intercepts. We would like to prove that our reductions cannot become chaotic. And we would like to test our model's ability to withstand noise by conducting stochastic simulations. We would like to thank Professors Kuznetsov and Molkov of IUPUI for mentoring us throughout this long project. We would like to thank the Siemens Foundation and the College Board for providing us with this wonderful opportunity, as well as the George Washington University for hosting this competition. We would like to thank the judges and the audience for donating their time to come and listen to us. And last but not least, we would like to thank our friends and families for their continued love and support. Here are our references.